So happy to be back here today. Special guest with me today. So we're starting April, which is Financial Literacy Month, but I wanted to bring us here today. It's actually tax day, isn't today April 15th?
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness, today's April 15th. So hope everyone filed their taxes. I don't know if there's an extension, but today is April 15th. But we want to first acknowledge the Timeless Gospel radio station for inviting us here and giving us this platform to talk and to share information from the Dee-Brief. You know, we come on every month and we really have conversations of real talk, real strategy, and real leadership because we want to engage everyone one insight at a time. So if you are watching live on my Facebook channel, you probably recognize the person sitting across from me because he's somebody I've known for a little while. But he is one that exemplifies real leadership. So we want to introduce Kevin Abraham Williams Sr. Thank you to the Debrief for Dr. D.
Well, it's my pleasure being here, Dr. D, as you're known on these airwaves.
Thank you so much. So we are going to talk today about community policing. And the conversation we're having is called Beyond the Badge, Community, Trust, and Life in Law Enforcement. So this is going to be a very engaging conversation. So if you are on, please tell somebody to tune in. I want to add that Kevin Abraham Williams Sr. will be on our podcast as well next week, so you can look forward to seeing him. So we'll have another rendition of this conversation. But Kevin, I always start my interviews, whether it's on the podcast or on the radio station, by asking our guests to introduce themselves. So if someone were to ask you, who is Kevin Williams, what would your answer be?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me here this evening. Um, Kevin Williams, longtime resident here in Southeast Queens, born and raised in Queens. Very fortunate to, you know, there's different parts of me. I'm a family man, married to a wonderful woman who happens to be really, really close by. Raised some kids in this community. We have our children. I'm also a law enforcement professional. Spent over 29 years, almost 29 years in the New York City Police Department, where I still currently serve. Uh, Community oriented, uh, husband, father, brother, son, uh, a true believer in the community and working in the community and making your community better. So there's a lot of different hats, but it all leads into improving not only the lives of my family, but also the lives of the people in the community.
Thank you for that. I would definitely agree with all that you've said to explain who you are in totality. So let's jump right in. We want to talk about Beyond the Badge, community policing, trust, and life in law enforcement. So you have about 30 years in law enforcement. Can you explain to us? We always hear the term community policing. So what does that mean? What is community policing? How does it change the way officers and law enforcement personnel really engage with the public? And I'm going to add another piece to that. Why is it important?
Okay, so let's just start back in policing, right? So, you know, obviously when you hear about police, it's about serve and protect. It's about serving the community and protecting them. That seems those are the things that you really see in policing. But community policing, you know, we realize in the profession that we have to work with the community to come together with effective strategies, working in partnership with the community to get the desirable outcomes, right? For years in policing, we came in kind of with an, you know, overarching or overarching approach about this is our way, but you cannot do that because every community is not the same. So community policing takes into the fact that one, we want to engage the community because the community knows the best about what they need. We want to strengthen police community relationships because for years the relationship between the police and the community has been very, very, very strained because of some of the tactics that were used to police that community.
Right.
So community policing kind of individualizes to the policing that goes on in the community. I was on a panel earlier today, and one of the things I said that law enforcement or policing is not monolithic. And what I mean by that is that what may work here in Southern Queens may not work in Harlem, may not work in Bedford-Stuyvesant may not work in Washington, D.C. So community policing, again, is bringing the police and the community together, having conversations, improving the relationship to get positive outcomes in regards to not only crime reduction, but also increasing the quality of life in police-community relations.
That's great. I'm glad you made a distinction that community policing is about what's best for the community. And we know as community members how best to enforce the laws in our community, what we need, because we're all different. And that's one thing that's really important for our officers to understand. And with that, I would ask a follow-up question. So, how do we ensure that the officers who are assigned to our community understand our community? Because if we are the most knowledgeable in what we need, then it's important for the officers to be familiar with us in the community, correct?
Yes, it starts with leadership, to be quite honest with you. In any organization, I don't care if it's a police organization or it's a social service organization, the leadership has to set the template of what is expected of the people that work in that organization. So it starts with the leader being proactive and engaging the community. But not only the leader doing it, he has to bring the officers and say, listen, this is what we're going to do. This is my expectation in regards to how you're going to interact with the community to get the desirable outcomes. We still want to, again, reduce crime, but there's different ways we could go about it. But it comes with the communication. So me as a leader, let's just say, for instance, here in New York City, we have precincts. So if I'm a precinct commander, I'm going to take the lead and I'm going to show the men and women that work with me each and every day that it's always about communication with that community to get the desirable outcome.
Yeah, that's important. And those communication methods are different for each community, right? Because it depends on how that community communicates. What happens here in Southeast Queens? What's the best way to get information from our community?
Well, the best way is sitting down, talking, meeting with the community. One of the things that I really stress in my current position and with the people that work with me, we go out and we'll go meet the people where they are, right? Because number one, you take away part of coming to a police facility. I don't care, even if it's just for business, has some level of intimidation, anxiety to it. So we go meet people where they are. If it's a church meeting or if it's a community-based meeting at a public hall, we'll sit down and we'll talk to the people in the community, hear the concerns of the people of the community, and try to work on a solution that works to achieve whatever the desired goal is.
Awesome. That's really great. Because we know that there is mistrust in most communities with law enforcement. That's been historical, and we've tried to do things to change that and to build some trust, but it's really been strained. So, what are some methods that you believe, in addition to sitting down and having conversations, going where people are, that can really be used, that's been successful to build those relationships and to help build that camaraderie between the community and the police officers?
Well, besides talking to um, the members of the community, you try to get a cross section of the community, right? We want to reach out to our senior saints. We want to talk to our youth. We want to talk to the people that are, adult age, because everybody has different concerns and everybody views policing in a different lens based on age, based on where you live and things of that nature. So we do the conversations, but we engage. So I give a perfect example for the youth. You know, I love playing basketball, and sometimes, but not everybody's into sports. So one of the things we do here in Southeast Queens, we engage the youth, whether it's teen talk. We have a program where we teach young people basic automotive skills. And again, that breaks down the barriers of communication and also builds trust. Because now you're seeing a police officer or any member of law enforcement in a different light.
Right.
It's not just coming in, answering calls for service, and then they leave. You get to see the totality of the humanity of a police officer.
Yeah, that's really good because those are real life examples that you've utilized to help really build successful community policing. What other initiatives have you seen in your almost 30-year career that are really successful? That's something for the youth. What about for our seniors?
One of the things in the New York City Police Department, one of the things we did, we'll do senior brunches where we bring seniors in,
Nice.
or we work with a adult day center where they come in for them. We'll sit down, we'll have dinner, excuse me, we'll have a brunch, and we'll sit and we interact. And we also talk to our senior saints in regards to issues affecting them. You
Right.
know, one of the biggest things you'll see is things around identity theft. You
Mm-hmm.
know, our older generation are still into writing checks, things of that nature. So
Right.
we were having a really hard issue around check washing, and it really, really affected our senior population because they're the ones who still write checks. They're the ones who still go to
Mm-hmm.
mailbox, and we have mailbox fishing. So we reach out to them in senior centers, churches in particular, and we talk to them about their concerns and their needs.
Yeah. You said something that I'm not familiar with. What is check washing?
Okay, so check washing is, let's say for instance, you write your husband a check because he's the greatest husband of the world, right?
Really?
And you put it in the mail,
To my
uh,
house.
yeah, to your house, and somebody would take that check and wash your name out of it. So you write in a check to
Oh.
Kevin Williams, they wash it out, they wash out the amount, so they go to your bank, and now your check is gonna get cleared in whatever person's name in that amount. So we were seeing a lot of theft in regards to that. And again, we reached out to the community, and again, we talk about prevention. We provided, especially our senior population, the special ballpoint pens that help defeat that to some extent,
Wow.
things of that nature.
That's great. That's really awesome. Wow. And check washing, I've never heard of that. So we learned something new today for those who didn't know what check washing is. And that's really important for our seniors because, our seniors still go to the mailbox. They still go to the post office to mail their bills. They don't really do things online that often. So that's really important. So we talked about initiatives. We talked about some things that we've done that work. But we know that the community is always evolving. So there's different people in the community on a
Hmm.
normal basis. There are people who've had trauma related to working with law enforcement. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen when it comes to building these relationships and building real partnerships with the communities, and what strategies have been put in place to overcome some of these challenges?
Well, to say what you use the correct word, trauma. So people have
Mm-hmm.
negative interactions with the police officers or members in law enforcement, and
Right.
listen, it stays with you. So what we try to do, we try to break the barriers in regards to that. One of the things that we try to do, explain. Let's say, for instance, you may have what you may perceive as a negative experience with a police officer. We try to get the police officer to explain from their perspective. And listen, one of the, and I have to go back. I'm sorry. It all starts with being very, very straightforward and very,
Right.
very honest with the
Right.
person that you're talking to, right? I always sit here and say, I may work for the world's best law enforcement organization, but we're not perfect and we're not always right. So part of it starts with owning up when one of our members in our organization may have made a mistake
Mm-hmm.
or they did something wrong. You have to call it what it is.
Right.
And, I've experienced dealing with members in the community when you already have established that relationship where you can have these really tough conversations. Again, you may not walk away 100% um, understanding or feeling that your problem has been solved 100%, but it's
Mm-hmm.
still a dialogue. We can agree to disagree. Those are the kind of things you need to do. And sometimes you need to explain, well, ABC happened, XYZ happened.
Right.
And so it's all about, straight talking. I say this all the time, straight talk leads to straight understanding.
Yes.
And you have to be authentic in your conversations that you have with members of the community.
Yeah, that's important. Coming and showing up as your true self and being very authentic, and owning when something has been done incorrectly or when you're wrong, so that community members can start to trust you. Because if you're not authentic and you present your fake self, then you're not going to develop that trust with the community members. So that's really good. So let's switch gears for a minute, because you said, being in law enforcement, you're human, right? You're an individual. We're real people, and sometimes when we see people in these positions, we forget that they have lives, they have families. You identified yourself as a husband, a father, a grandfather, a son. So law enforcement is a tough job, right? And it can be really difficult. Long days, insecurity about your own safety while you're trying to protect the safety of the community. So, being in law enforcement for almost 3 decades, how has being in law enforcement impacted your family life?
Well, it has impacted my family and life in regards to, obviously, unlike a lot of different professions, it's not a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday off on the holidays type of
Right.
profession. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Mhm.
Depending on what tour you may work steady midnights, things of that nature. It had an impact because obviously I didn't have the traditional job
Mhm.
that somebody else has. I may have missed a couple of holidays with my family, but one of the things that I tried to do, I really tried to do to minimize that
Mhm.
aspect as much as possibly can. I always tell people in law enforcement, listen, there's times you have to be at work, and depending on the situation, you know. But then there's times you don't have to be at work. So that's the time you really need to lean into your family. It's like what everybody says. You put stuff in the bank and you make these bank
Mhm.
deposits in regards to your family. And you also have to remember, even though we do deal with a difficult job, I'm a firm believer. I'm going to be a police officer or a member of law enforcement for a finite period of time.
Mhm.
And I'm going to be a husband, a father, a brother, a friend for the rest of my life. So
Right.
you always have to have that proper perspective, right? And then also, you do things based on the age of your children. When my kids were younger, obviously it was very important for me. And you work it out if you have a partner and you're living together, things of that nature. You work it out what's best for the kids. I first started, I had to work midnights based
Mhm.
on my family situation at the time. But it allowed me to pick my kids up from school,
Yep.
do homework with the kids, eat dinner with the kids, and then I went to work. So, you know, there's ways you can mitigate some of the things in regards to the burdens that law enforcement puts on you when it comes to your family life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did an amazing job at that. You
Can I
were
get this recorded, please? Thank you.
it is recorded. You did an amazing job. So, there really wasn't much impact. You definitely did the midnight, so you were able to pick the kids up. I did the morning, so someone was always there with them. And you were fortunate to be able to do that because you rarely missed any holidays or anything with the children. But for officers who can't do that, sometimes we know that there can be challenges internally, whether it's guilt or feeling like you're not there for your family the way you need to be, or not there for yourself
Mhm.
the way you need to be. So, what mental health challenges have you seen some officers face, and how can they get support? How does the police department assist in that, support officers? Where can they reach out for help? And do you have any programs that can help officers that may not want to discuss any challenges that they're having?
Very good question. So, in regards to, listen, the demands on family based also on the demands of the job can be challenging,
Mm-hmm.
right? But one thing I have to sit here saying about the law enforcement profession, we have come light years when it comes to recognizing mental health and the wellness of our members of the service.
Mm-hmm.
20, 30 years ago, to talk about any type of mental situation in policing was taboo.
Right.
But again, we've educated ourselves as law enforcement executives, and we realize that mental health is important. The wellness of the members of the service that work with us each and every day is critical. So one thing that law enforcement now, they have leaned into providing our members with various avenues, both within the organization and also outside the organization,
Mm-hmm.
to get the people the mental health care that they need. You know, the organization I'm a member of, the New York City Police Department, we have a counseling unit. We have
Mm-hmm.
police self peer support, right? But they also have mental health availability through their unions, through their health insurance. We also have religious and fraternal organizations
Right.
that also help people from a cultural standpoint in regards to it. And then also, we do it outside of the job. You can go through your private health care insurance and get some type of counseling that you needed. And then also, another thing that the law enforcement has really recognized, you used to hear things called like the rubber gun squad, things of that
Mm-hmm.
nature. And we've moved away from that. You know, like I said, 30 years ago, somebody reaching out to get some type of mental health aid
Right.
could have been derailing to their career. But now the police department understands when you handle that responsibly, the job is going to handle that responsibly and make sure that doesn't derail. We get you the help that you need so that you could be not only a successful person in life, Because again, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
we're not going to be police officers for the rest of our lives. You have to be a better person, right? And you being a better person, you being a person that can better deal with situations, whether it's financially, whether it's with your family, that again makes you a better police officer, not only for the men and women that work with you, but also the communities that you're going to engage. Because we don't want you having, you know, situations that are challenging and then also that affect what you do in the workplace.
Yeah, no, that's really important, and I'm really glad to hear that the police department has moved forward in their thinking related to mental health. Because when it comes to physical health, if something's wrong with your heart, you're going to see a cardiologist. If something's wrong with another part of your body, you're going to get an MRI. You're going to get a CAT scan. You're going to see a doctor related to what your ailment is. So if there's something wrong mentally with your brain or with how you're feeling, then you should be able to discuss that and go and see a physician or whoever you need to see appropriately to discuss your mental health. So I'm glad to see we are evolving as a society in the importance of mental health. It can't be separated from physical health. It's one. It shouldn't actually be a separate component as far as I'm concerned. So I'm glad to see that. So as family members, we know our spouses, we know our children if they're in law enforcement. We are blessed to have a son in law enforcement as well. So if we see something that is out of the ordinary, or we notice that someone is behaving differently and they're not acting on it, what can we do as family members to support that person? Is there a person we can engage? Is there someone we can talk to? How can we initiate the response?
Well, obviously, one, you have a conversation with that person and you tell them exactly what they see from your perspective, that you see what's going on with them.
Mm-hmm.
But also, going back to what we talked about before about all the different avenues which are available to somebody in law enforcement, we also include the family. The family are also, um, they can avail themselves to those services also.
Great.
Because again, we believe in the whole holistic, not just the police officer, but also their family. Because you're absolutely right. Being in law enforcement, being a family and somebody in law enforcement presents a unique challenge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not too many jobs where you send your loved one to work and that job can put them in a dangerous position where they may not come home at the end of the night. But that does happen. That's a position sometime in law enforcement. So you have to let the family know. Also, there's challenges. You go to work. Listen, unfortunately, you're making an arrest. You had plans with your family.
Right.
Sometimes you're going to have to forego that, and that causes strain and stress on the family. But again, the services that are available to our members of the service are also available to the family also.
Yeah, that's important because I can say in your almost 30 years, the law enforcement community has been very welcoming to me and ensuring that I understand everything and that I'm included, but also that I have comfort in knowing that if something happens to you or I need to reach out to someone, that resource I can avail myself to. So that's really good to know. So, for those of you who are just joining us, we are on the Debrief with Dr. D, and we are sitting here having a conversation with Kevin Williams about community policing. The conversation is beyond the badge, and he's giving us insight into how to engage the community, the life of law enforcement, and what we can do as community members to make sure that we stay connected to our law enforcement in a positive way. So, Kevin, let's just stay a little bit longer on this conversation related to the personal life of a community member and the police department. So, the police department being such a global entity, but also representing all of New York City and talking about the New York City Police Department, I'm sure you have individuals of many faiths, many ethnic backgrounds, and many cultural backgrounds in the police department. So, how do you ensure that the police department, the members, have that balance emotionally but also spiritually in their lives as far as their faiths and observances? We're about to go into Passover and Resurrection this weekend, but also ensuring that they have that time for their own beliefs.
Again, it comes with recognizing the differences and providing organizations. So as much as we talk about fraternal organizations that may be based on your cultural upbringing, we also have religious organizations.
Hmm.
Every faith is represented in the New York City Police Department: Muslim, Jewish, Protestant, Catholic, Christian,
Hmm.
Buddhist. They all have a religious organization that's tied into the job. And also, they have their own programming to reach their members. One of the things that started in my organization, they allow prayer in the afternoon. They have prayer groups. They have yoga meditation. They have different things that allow you to express your faith. Um, when we look at members of our Sikh community, for years they fought to,
Hmm.
wear their beards because that's a symbol of their faith.
Right.
And they were allowed to do that because we realized in law enforcement that you have to recognize their faith. Because, listen, faith and religion is a strong component of people's lives. So we have to lean into them and those different organizations and make it available to the members of the service to practice their faith and feel free practicing their faith inside the organization.
Great. Give me 1 second. I know I hear some background noise. That's really important, and I'm glad that there was a turnaround in that too. There seems to have been a lot of shifts. You talked about the shift in mental health and shift in recognizing holistically religious organizations. What do you attribute that shift to?
Over time, listen, policing has changed. Like, if you go back to a couple of decades ago, it was the warrior mentality
Hmm.
in policing. We are the warriors, we're the front line, us versus them, all these other different things.
Right.
Then there was a shift, some evidence based, some based on situations in the community where we see that we are more guardians than we are warriors versus the community. Going back to the same thing with the community and community policing, you know, I can't come into your community and tell you how to police. We
Right.
need to listen to the community, and that makes us more effective. So that's some of the things that started to change in the police, especially in the 90s as we headed into the 2000s. So you saw the change in policing in regards to understanding that, again, like I said earlier, we're not monolithic,
Right.
right? Policing is not monolithic in so many different levels. So we have to change and adapt with the times. And just like any organization, if you do not adapt, you will not survive. So it's very important in us in law enforcement to see the changes, whether it's generational, whether it's cultural, things of that nature, and embrace it, but still being true to the mission of providing, reducing crime and increasing the quality of life of the people in the community.
Yeah, I was sitting with someone, I think it was Dr. Odie in one of her interviews, and she was talking about the backslider. And she was saying that she doesn't believe that you can backslide because the world is forever evolving. So all we have to do is stand still. And if we don't move forward, then the world will pass us by. So we're not actually backsliding, we're just staying stagnant because we're always evolving as a society. So that aligns with what you just said. So you're bringing on new officers all the time.
Hmm.
We have an evolving community. We have an evolving police department. New officers coming on board. They may come on whether depending on their age and their family situation with new children, right? Babies being born, new marriages, young individuals. What advice do you give? Because I know you give advice. You mentor people on a regular basis. So what advice do you give young officers, and I'm saying young not in age but just in their career as they join the police department for all these different aspects that we're talking about?
Well, every time we get a new recruit class that graduates from the police academy, I sit and I meet with them when they get assigned to my command. And some of the things we talk about, I talk about general life with them
Hmm.
in regards to life of being a police officer. I tell them the expectation in regards to how their life has changed because you are held to a higher standard than the regular public because of the awesome responsibility that you have
Right.
on so many different levels. But also, I tell them about the work life balance that is very, very important.
Hmm.
That, listen, there are going to be times when you're going to have to be at work. And there's going to be times when you're not going to have to be at work. And you have to choose wisely to balance your work life balance so that you pouring into your family. Again, like we talked about mental health. Again, to talk about struggle or mental struggle used to be taboo in the agency, and
Right.
we talk about it, and I impress upon to my to new officers because listen, policing is very, very dynamic. You know, it's not you come to work every day, you're sitting in front of the computer, you're typing the same thing every day.
Mhm.
You know, you could be interacting one day with a person is in crisis, and then the next day you're responding to a homicide scene.
Right.
So you have to utilize the resources that are available to you, and don't be ashamed to ask for help. You know, one of the things again that has been um, a staple, for lack of a better word, of the old policing. Like, you can't ask for help. That made you seem somewhat weak, and that's not. And I stress to the young officers as they embark upon their career to again lean in if they need help. You know, help learning the job. I mean, it's a big culture change
Mhm.
coming into the police department compared to a lot of different things that people may have done before. It's just not a job; it's a culture, and you have to
Yes.
prepare yourself for that culture and understand the culture and not lose yourself into the
Mhm.
culture, because as many of the positive things I could talk about, there's some negative things that come with the culture itself that you have to be aware, and you have to fortify yourself to kind of prevent that happening to you. So you have to be very, very honest and have a straightforward talk. Now, obviously, you know, I address a crowd of 40 recruits.
Mhm.
They're not going to have the same experience, but there are certain things that are similar that they can relate to, and that's what I try to speak to them about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a career path that you need to make sure you're ready for. And then if you're not ready, when you come on the job, finding someone that can really coach and mentor you and give you that advice. You come from a family of law enforcement, so your father was on the job. You're on the job. Our son is on the job. What is the best advice that you believe you've been given coming on the job? And is the advice that you would give or that you've received different for someone coming on the job versus generational police officers?
No, I think it's the same advice,
Mhm.
but obviously, again, like you said, I've been very, very fortunate in my career. My father was a retired sergeant. Um, as you said, our son is on the job, so that's more like personal what they told me.
Right.
But the advice I give to any police officer, again, it's all about going home at the end of the day.
Right.
It's all about looking out for your brother and sister police officer, but it's also interacting with the community and working with the community, because you can do your job and not interact in the community, and your day is going to go by very, very slowly,
Mhm.
right? And you have to teach them and press upon them interacting with the community. So those are some of the pieces of advice that I give. You know, obviously, you know, you should look to learn how to be a police officer, then look to see where you want to advance within the agency,
Mhm.
right? And you look towards older members of the senior members of in the agency who have been a little bit more experienced than you. Take some of that, and again, you have to be open minded,
Right.
because again,
Very true.
I may take five of your attributes, the other five will not work for me, because we're just different people, or it just doesn't really align to who I am as an individual. So, you know, and I tell everybody, I tell the best police officer is the police officer that uses this
Mhm.
and this, their ability to think and speak. We don't. I mean, I've been very, very fortunate in 29 years in policing that, you know, I never really got into too many situations where I had to use the firearm. I haven't gotten into any situation, to be quite honest with you,
Mhm.
but that was never the first option. Because if
Right.
you engage people, even in the moment of crisis, and you have conversations with them and find some type of common ground, it makes policing easy. So those are some of the words of wisdom that I give to new officers that come in our agency.
Yeah. So that's important point, and it brings up another question. So, giving advice and coaching young officers and getting that information from seasoned police officers. What about that officer that may be coached and mentored and not take that advice? And then something tragic happens. How does that impact them mentally? And what do you do to help them to be able to move forward, right? Because we all make mistakes, but
Hmm.
to help them to move forward and not let that hinder their ability to be an effective officer.
Well, in instances like that, listen. Not everybody's gonna listen to what you say. Like
Mhm.
I could sit here and say there was some advice that my father gave me that I didn't listen to.
Mhm.
Right? I was very unfortunate it didn't come back and have a negative ramification for me. But you know, when things are made, again, you have to be very honest.
Right.
You have to look at the scope of the incident. There's some incidents like it is what it is, and you have to have a very frank conversation with that member. But it's all about communication and open and honest dialogue and letting them know, listen, that's maybe something I wouldn't have done. And if you look at it from this perspective, right, and it may include, you may listen, discipline may have to happen,
Hmm.
right? And then people look at discipline negatively. Discipline is only correcting negative workplace behavior. And, you have honest conversation. Well, maybe you should have done this differently. Maybe you should have looked at it from this perspective or that person's perspective. So it's all about having honest conversation. It's all about, um, you know, every experience, and it's one of the things that I really enjoy about policing. No two experiences are the same. No two
Right,
days are the same. So you have to also understand that also.
right, right. Thank you for that. Before we move into another section, is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners related to policing, family life, spiritual life, and just that connection to get the best out of it and have the best experience that I haven't asked you?
No, I'll just sit here and say to those that are listening and those who may be considering a career in law enforcement, they do not have to be separated. You don't have to be this and then be this way at work and then separate your faith. You can bring your whole self into
Right,
your law enforcement agency, and it's going to be recognized in that law enforcement agency. There's support in regards to whatever it is, your faith, whatever is your orientation, anything in regards to that. There's going to be a support group that you will be able to identify that will help
great.
you along the way and help you acclimate to the law enforcement career.
That's great because we know a lot of people suffer with imposter syndrome, and we want to make sure that, especially with law enforcement, that you're able to bring your whole self to your career. So, thank you for that. So, this is 2025, and we know social media plays a huge role in everything that we do. We can't get away from it. And social media, we've seen how it can influence the perception of law enforcement. So, in your experience, what have you seen as far as social media and how it influences how people view law enforcement and how it may negatively impact the building of the relationship of community policing and perceptions that people have?
Well, it's some good in it and some bad in it.
Hmm.
So, it all depends. You get a 30-second clip and you see something that may not look
Right,
like it's procedural. It may not look like it's legal. It may look like, you only see in a 30-second clip. You don't see the whole thing in the totality. So I always tell people, and this is something I have conversations with not only just inside of law enforcement, but also outside of law enforcement. You got to kind of peel the onion back, for lack of a better word, to see exactly what happened because there was something that led up to that video, and there's something that happened afterwards. Now, there's going to be certain videos, and we could talk about, George Floyd. Like, there's no discussing it. It was what it was. It was atrocious. It was illegal, and the officer was wrong. But there's other instances where sometimes, and I tell people, policing is sometimes not a pretty occupation,
hmm,
right? And sometimes, it's going to look not what it is. And what I mean by that is you may come up on the scene and see a video clip and you're going to say, oh my God, the police officers, excessive force, this, that, and the other, they're illegal, they shouldn't have stopped it. But, it's not always pretty in law enforcement.
right,
Unfortunately, sometimes, we have to have an escalation of force. And, again, you got to take what you see in social media and be able to decipher it for yourself. Again, I'd sit here and say there's going to be times when, especially in law enforcement, where the interaction is wrong, straight wrong. But there's also times when the interaction is nuanced, and you have to be able to see that nuance and understand that nuance. So, and that's with anything in life, to be quite honest with you. Somebody gives you 30-second tips on how to save money. You gotta peel it back
right,
and see how it applies to you and see if it really works for you or if it's truthful what the person is saying.
right. Absolutely, absolutely. So, community engagement, and speaking of tense situations in law enforcement that we may see on social media, can you think of a time or maybe a situation where working with the community or engaging in community can help to resolve a tense situation or resolve a miscommunication or a misperception? because we're talking about community policing
Hmm.
and involving the community in law enforcement. So how can we leverage that?
Um, well, again, it comes to having authentic relationships, honest conversations with members of the community, and also the community understanding you. There's been situations where, again, you may see something and you may sit here and think, oh my goodness gracious, the police did this, it's atrocious, it's illegal, it's this, that, and the other, and the community's in an uproar, right? But then that's where community policing kicks in, and having that relationship with the people in the community where you can have a real honest conversation, especially with those key stakeholders, to say,
Mm-hmm.
listen,
Right.
maybe we bring you in, we'll sit down, we explain it, you know, and if you don't have trust or a level of trust prior to that, like one of the things I always sit here and say, like, we can't start a relationship at crisis time. That
Mm-hmm.
is
Right.
just, it's done. It's done. The crisis is always going to overrule the establishment of that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So if you start these relationships in the inception, in the quote unquote good times, if a challenging, difficult time comes along, you're going to be able to have honest conversation. But also, one of the things that we have to do within law enforcement, again, we used to, or there were times when we would just circle the wagons and no, no, no. You have to admit when there are problems, right? In
Mm-hmm.
regards to it, and say, listen, this may not be, the best example of law enforcement, or,
Right.
or or the use of policy or the use of force, and have frank conversations.
Right. No, that makes sense. For those of you who are just joining us, we have about 15 minutes left. We are talking to Kevin Williams about community policing. Beyond the badge is our topic in our conversation, and we are having an amazing conversation and insight related to what community policing is and what happens in your career as a police officer. So, we're going to move into training, one of your favorite topics, I know. So, we talked about community policing, engagement, we talked about misconceptions and perceptions that can be false, but also just the role of the officer and their coming on board as a police officer and coaching and mentors. What role does training play? How does training prepare officers for their job, but also, particularly for this conversation, for working with the community effectively?
Okay, so training, obviously, any entry level position, you need a level of training because it's something you never did before that you're going to start doing. So we have to train you.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, when we bring our officers into our police academy, we're going to train them on law. We're going to train them on penal law, policies and procedures, laws of arrest, things of that nature. But we also have a cultural component also where we bring people in from different, communities to explain to the police officers the cultural norms of those communities.
Hmm.
Again, you have people that may have never ever been in the quote unquote inner city except to hang out. And now you're going to be patrolling
Right.
the inner city. So we bring a lot of different people, a cross section of community members to speak to our police officers while they're in training to have them understand intimately how things work in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Also, one of the things I do, when I get new officers that come to this area, Southeast Queens, I get a cross section of our community. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, you just can't have the same voices all the time, right? Even people who they think we may not have the strongest relationship, who may be um, critical, to some lack of a better word, of the police, while you bring them in and speak to the officers. If we're going to put an officer in um, one of our precincts in South Jamaica, we're going to have somebody from that community explain the community so they,
Very
they
good.
can understand, the cultural norms of that particular community, compared to, let's say, for instance, if you were a police officer in the Rockaways. It's a little different. Communities are a little bit different. So it's about bringing those people in, having those conversations, and then when we let our officers out into, their field training, one of the things I encourage people, speak to the community. They could
Mm-hmm.
be your best resource. They're the ones that are going to tell you and make you a more effective police officer anyway, because they're going to be able to sit here and say, Darlene's going to sit here and say, yo, it's not this person, it's that person.
Right.
But you're never going to get that information from Darlene if you never have a conversation.
True.
Obviously, in the beginning, it's going to be very skeptical. New cop comes in, somebody says hello, they may not say hello back, But I challenge the officers that work with me every day. You're the professional. You're the one who's paid being there. So you're going to continue to engage. If you don't if they don't get a response the first day, it's about consistency. You
Mm-hmm.
don't do it the first day and then, oh, I'm never going to say it again. Say it the second day, third day, and it works. I've seen it work, both personally in my own journey in policing, but also as a leader in a law enforcement agency.
That's great. And we're going to talk about leadership now. So, training in the police academy, ensuring that law enforcement officers, as they're coming on board, they have the right information, they're learning the penal law, they're learning about the community. But then you leave training, and I'm sure there's training, ongoing training, not just when you're in the police academy. I'm hoping you can tell us about that. But what role does leadership play? Because as you leave the academy and you're going into a precinct or you're going into, someplace else to work, if you're not working in a precinct, you have leadership that is above you, that's helping you, that's monitoring you, that's coaching you. I'm hoping that that's happening. So, what role does leadership play, and what are the levels of leadership in the police department?
Well, leadership is critical. And again, like I said earlier, it's not just in policing, any organization, you have to
Right.
have levels of leadership. First thing you have to, as a leader, I think you have to empower the people that work with you,
Mm-hmm.
right? In regards to what they can and cannot do, how they should do it. But then also you have to set the example and be the example of that leadership. I can't tell you to do something and then I'm not going to do it myself
Right.
as a leader. Um, you also have to ensure that your message is very, very clear, right? I tell people in leadership, if you're fair, firm, and consistent with the people that work with you all the time, you're going to achieve your goal. But if you're not fair, firm, and consistent, if you're inconsistent and you're not fair, that's going to strain on your leadership style.
Mm-hmm.
In our organization, obviously you have, and then you also tell everybody, in your own right, you're a leader, right?
Right.
You may be a leader on that footpost out and you're interacting with the community. Obviously, the sergeant who is your immediate supervisor, they're into supervising the 8 to 10 police officers that are under that sergeant's particular responsibility. Then as you move up to in the ranks, you know, it's a little bit more global in regards to the whole breadth of the organization. But everybody's a leader. I don't care who you are. I don't care what position you are. You have leadership. Now, there's different levels of leadership, but you are a leader, and that's one of the things I try to stress to the people that work with me each and every day.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm going to ask you your proudest moment in your police journey for yourself. But I first want to say, I think my proudest moment for you was watching your elevation, right? Like you studied hard, you work hard, and seeing each time that you got promoted, we were all very proud as your family members to see that your hard work, your determination, because you work hard, Kevin, that it has paid off, and to see where you are in your career at this point in time. So, congratulations. We're proud of you.
Thank you.
What is your proudest moment? So, give me two parts, as a police officer, but also as a leader.
Okay. um, I would say my proudest moment just, mm, that's hard. And why I say that, because I had a whole bunch of different situations. You know, one of the things that I was very, very proud of is like, again, you don't know who you can affect
Mm-hmm.
and the long term effect you have on it. So, a story. Um, I came on the police department in 1996. I graduated from Police Academy March of 1997. I was assigned to the 88 precinct in Fort Greene, Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
As every other rookie, you sit there and you get assigned to a foot post. So my foot post was along Myrtle Avenue, let's say in and around the Ingersoll Whitman developments, the Fort Greene developments, as they call them. And, I'm just out there being who I am,
Mm-hmm.
being a genuine person in regards to it. So fast forward 1997 to 2010.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now the rank of captain. I'm working up in the precinct in Harlem. I'm an
Mm-hmm.
executive officer there. And this young officer comes to me and says, "You look familiar to me."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, he says, "I remember you." And he told me about, he grew up in that neighborhood and he had an interaction with me. Now, again, I could have been a nasty, rude, that type of cop, but that's who I wasn't. I wasn't,
Mhm.
and that could have impacted him where he would have never came on the job. But now, fast forward almost 2096, let's say 13 years later, here he stood as a police officer. So I was very, very proud of that because not that I take any credit in regards to this gentleman joining the agency, and he's doing very well, to be quite honest with
Oh,
you.
he's a police officer.
Yeah, he's a police
Oh,
officer.
that's amazing.
Yeah, he's a police officer. I take credit just for the fact that, for lack of a better word, I didn't mess it up. Like, my interaction didn't dissuade him from becoming a member of law enforcement. Because, like we said before, sometimes interactions with policing leave people scarred, leave people traumatized, where to the point where they don't want to deal with law enforcement. My proudest moment was the one
As a leader.
as a leader.
Mhm.
My proudest moment as a leader. Again, I'm a big advocate of mentoring. I'm a big
Mhm.
advocate of looking back and uplifting people who are coming up in the ranks. So, my proudest moment is also seeing people that I've interacted move up the ranks and assume positions of great responsibility,
Yep.
whether it's commanding officers of precincts, whether it's command, overseeing bureaus and different units in the police department. But I like to see advancement, especially, our young black brothers and sisters,
Mhm.
to sit there and see the progress that they make. And then the last thing that's more personally touching, my proudest personal moment.
Don't
Um,
make me cry.
I'm, I'm not gonna make you right, gonna make you upset. But anyway, my my proudest moment was seeing my father, as a retired member of the service, pin my son on
Mhm.
um, Gun and Shield Day. To tie in the two generations.
Mhm.
That was something that was very, very, you know, it was it was awesome to me. Here we come, three generations of policing,
Mhm.
and then to have, like, again, my father to be able to pin his grandson when he received his police shield. I thought that was pretty cool, for lack of
How
a
did it
better
make
word.
you feel?
It made me very proud, to sit there and see that. It made me very, very proud. Because one of the things with our son, like, we didn't push him into policing.
No, not at
You
all.
know,
Not little
I
Kevin,
could,
as a matter
yeah,
of fact.
yeah, I know, but you know, I didn't push him. We didn't push him into police. He decided to go into
Yeah.
that field, and to sit there and see that legacy, especially again in the African American community.
Mhm.
You see shows that are dedicated to other ethnicities doing well generationally. Um, in regards to policing, used to watch every Friday, unfortunately.
Yes.
But to see that legacy
Right.
continue on, it was very, very touching, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah. And to give yourself credit, because you're not going to do that, it was very touching to see your father pin you when you became chief as well. That was very touching as well, to
Oh,
see him
okay.
do that, and for little Kevin to be there for that as well. That was great. So we have about 7 more minutes. So I want to switch gears back to civilians and community policing. So, what advice? We talked about advice for officers, but for us as civilians, what advice would you give us about our interaction with law enforcement and how we can foster ways for mutual respect? What should we do?
I would say to people who in the community, you have to engage your police department.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked in a lot of different places, and I see when the members of the community lean into the police
Yeah,
department
lean in. Mm-hmm.
and hold their police department accountable, right? Not just, again, not at a time of crisis, right? So, for instance, every police precinct in the city of New York has a precinct community council meeting.
Mm-hmm.
All 78 precincts in the city have them, but you only see a handful of people that come.
Right.
And you need to engage with your police department because, number one, again, that's the agency that's probably the most impactful
Mm-hmm.
on a lot of different levels, on your personal freedom, on your quality of life,
Yeah.
right, on your safety, things of that nature. So you need to interact right? And then again, the same way our police officers learn by interacting with with the community can learn and see the humanity in our police officers. So I encourage anybody, um, engage your police department because again, I've seen it on so many different levels that once that relationship is there and it's authentic and it's genuine and it's based off of a level of trust, great things can happen
Right.
between the police and the community. And also, again, if you need your needs addressed, that's the best avenue. So again, if we look at the demographic of some of our community council meetings, it's usually some of our senior members of the community. You don't have too many youth in there. So what do you think issues are going to get addressed? The
Right.
seniors issues like
Right.
things like check washing and things of that nature
Mhm.
compared to what may be plaguing, whether it's cyberbullying or whether it's you know things that whatever else that the youth may be involved in. But if we don't have that venue to understand that, we're not going to be able to address it appropriately.
Right. Right. Very, very true. So we have about 4 minutes, Kevin. If I'm going to ask you a final question, and then we'll do some closing. So, if you could change one thing about policing today, one thing, what would it be and why? And what final advice would you like to give? One thing about policing that you could change, and final advice.
If I could change one thing about policing, uh, I would like to see more police officers in the actual precincts
Hmm.
because, again, we answer many calls of service. We're responsible for a lot of different things. So the more people power, human power that we
Yeah.
have that come to our commands, we be able to service the community uh, better in regards to that. And then at the end of the day, that's the bread and butter of policing.
Right.
Patrol, answering calls for service, responding to those quality of life conditions. That's the bread and butter of policing. Obviously, policing has many different fields, but at the end of the day, when you think about that, other than what you see on TV with detective shows, that's our bread and butter. So I
Right.
would like to see more. So I encourage anybody here, if you're interested, you know, when I grew up in an era where you had to take every test, every civil service test,
Hmm.
at least take the test so you have an option. And, for those people that may be listening and wary about law enforcement and scared about law enforcement, it's not that bad. Does it come with its set of challenges? The answer is absolutely yes,
Right.
right? But I could sit here as living proof, not only for myself, but my father retired healthy.
Hmm.
I'm very fortunate that he's still here with us. He's been enjoying retirement for almost 30 years now.
Right.
You know, Now to see myself and then also to see one of my children into the organization, again, it's a very a viable profession and a career that could do a lot for you and your family.
Right, very true. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us today on the Debrief with Dr. D. Once again, we are proud of you and your 30-year career. Really appreciate your support and also your service to the community. Once again, Kevin is going to be on our podcast. We upload a new episode every Tuesday, so you can look forward to seeing him next Tuesday. You can check that out on our YouTube channel. Some announcements for those of you who are in the community looking for something to do for pre Mother's Day. So on Saturday, May 3rd, we are hosting a pre Mother's Day brunch. It's going to be at Kiss Entertainment right here in Southeast Queens. If you go on our website, Dr. Darlene Williams Consulting, LLC, you will be able to see information about it. It's posted on social media, so please get your tickets right away. You do not want to miss that event. We're going to have a special celebration for our Heavenly Mothers. This event is being done in honor of my Heavenly Mother, Betty Jean Brown. Thank you so much. Any final words?
Listen, I just again, as a thank you for having me.
Of
Thank you
course.
for allowing me to share my insight. And I look forward to nothing but continued success for you as you continue this road of entrepreneurship.
Thank you so much. Everyone, have a great evening. Welcome again. Thank you for joining the Debrief with Dr. D, where we have real talk, real strategy, and real leadership one insight at a time.